Welcome to the second of three sessions of NeuroFuture, Conversations on Women Advancing Neuroscience Worldwide. I want to welcome all of you again, women in neuroscience from all over the world. This is the second of three sessions of NeuroFuture, Conversations on Women Advancing Neuroscience Worldwide. This event series is a collaborative effort between the International Brain Initiative, World Women in Neuroscience, that is a part of the IBRO Global Connectome Program, and UBC's Neuroethics Canada. And our goal is to bring together a wide range of voices in dialogue on the impact of women in neuroscience innovation. And we will featured in our first session and in this one, and the third one that is forthcoming in September, distinguished women neuroscientists to explore the intersections of AI, brain technology, and ethics, neuroscience, diversity, and society. I am Judy. I'm one of the founders of the original Women in World Neuroscience, now World Women in Neuroscience, led ever so capably by Emmeline Edwards and Jean King and their amazing team. I am the immediate past chair of the International Brain Initiative. I'm professor of neurology, and I direct Neuroethics Canada at UBC with co-faculty member Dr. Julie Robillard, who's based at our second location in Vancouver. Neuroethics Canada is based at our primary campus in Vancouver. I'm delighted to welcome you and share this virtual space with all our distinguished speakers, all of whom are my colleagues and friends from at least a decade long. So it is just maybe a half a decade for some of you. For one of you, it is just a pleasure to be here with you. I'll introduce each shortly. I'd like to acknowledge that UBC, Neuroethics Canada, works and lives, and all of us have the privilege to thrive on the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We're very grateful, and given the almost 100 participants we have on the call already, I really invite all of you from all over the world to think about the lands on which you live and reside and thrive, and the work that we are able to do together, and offer appreciation for all that is available to us where we are, some in more developed and others in less developed parts of the world, and truly appreciate the privilege that we share and the securities that many of us are able to enjoy, and appreciate the insecurities that others among us are at less privileged to have. Again, we're just going to acknowledge our supporters, World Women in Neuroscience, part of the IBRO Global Connectome Program, the International Brain Initiative, and Julie and my center at Neuroethics Canada. If you'd like to learn more about World Women in Neuroscience and explore our initiatives, we invite you to become a member by visiting our website and following us on social media. So we have 85 minutes ahead of us. I'm going to, just in a moment, introduce our speakers. Then we'll have a short, after each presents for about 7 minutes, we'll have a short panel discussion, and then we will open up the floor to all of you to join us in discussion. Just a couple of housekeeping rules. UBC takes its position on respectful environment very seriously. We just wish everyone to engage openly and forthrightly and respectfully, even if we don't all agree on the positions that we take. Please make sure your mics are muted unless you are asking questions during the Q&A portion. We will not be using the chat. We will be using the Q&A mechanism for the questions. We are recording the event. By agreeing to participate with us, you are granting us permission to record your participation and disseminate it on UBC's Neuroethics Canada's YouTube channel. Social media, connect with us on LinkedIn, the IBI, WWN, Neuroethics Canada, and the event hashtag is hashtag World Women Neuro and hashtag WWN events. So I'm just checking our subscribers. We have 96 participants at the moment. That is just absolutely incredible. If Marianne, you are able to have a look at what countries are represented. I'd love to be able to announce that before the end of the session today. But now, by way of introduction and in order of presentations, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Jennifer Chandler, professor at the Faculty of Law and Medicine at the University of Ottawa. Professor Chandler studies the legal and ethical aspects of biomedical sciences and technology with a focus on the intersection of the brain sciences, law, and ethics. In 2025, she received a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair focusing on the law and the ethics of brain technologies. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you.
Dr. Laura
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Judy.
Dr. Laura Cabrera is the Dorothy Fur Huck and Lloyd Huck Chair in Neuroethics at Penn State in the United States. She's Associate Professor of Engineering, Science, and Mechanics, as well as Philosophy. And she's also affiliated with the Center for Neuroengineering. Dr. Cabrera is a member and chair of the Advisory Board for Neurotechnology for IEEE and IEEE Tech Ethics. Dr. Olivia Matshabane is the principal investigator of the Africa Neuroethics Research Group at Stellenbosch University in the Genomics of Brain Disorders Unit within the Department of Psychiatry in South Africa. She also co-directs the African Neuroscience, Neuroethics, and Society short course, which I was privileged to be a part of with some 25 amazing students from around Africa in late 2025. Her research focuses on brain and mental health, with a particular interest in the ethics of neuropsychiatric genomics, cross-cultural neuroethics, indigenous methodologies, community engagement, and culture. And Dr. Julie Robillard is an associate professor of neurology at UBC. She's a scientist in patient experience at BC Children's Hospital and a faculty member of Neuroethics Canada. She leads the Neuroscience Engagement and Smart Tech Group, where she brings together her background in neuroscience and ethics to the evaluation and development of social technologies to support brain health across the lifespan. We could not be more lucky than to have these four speakers with us today, and I'm going to open the floor to Professor Chandler to present first. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Atlas. Thank you. I'm just going to share my slides. One second. Okay, here we go. I hope everyone can see that okay. I'm truly delighted to be here and with these wonderful co-panelists of mine and with Dr. Illis. I am a bit of a strange kind of neuroscientist in that I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a lawyer, but I have a background in science. I did studies in biochemistry before I embarked on studies in law. And then in the work that I do as a lawyer, I focus on medical issues, on the regulation of biomedical research and technology. And I teach mental health law because I'm very interested in the brain and mental health and policy around mental health generally, but also interventions in the brain. But I thought perhaps today with we have sort of a short 7 minutes to speak, each of us, that I might just talk briefly about one issue that I've been thinking about quite a bit in the last little while, and am anticipating thinking about more going forward. And that is issues around the privacy of the brain data that we're collecting. So let me talk briefly about that with you. So to set the stage, I we could say a couple of things about electroencephalography, which is a way of monitoring electrical activity across the brain. And this is a lot of text here, my apologies, but two main points. The first main point is that this EEG data may look like a bunch of squiggles, but it's actually quite informative. It requires only relatively short periods of resting state EEG, or measurement of brain activity, to start to infer the presence of various conditions, and there's a few mentioned there. And there's been effort over time to find this correlation between a condition and this EEG pattern. And I guess the takeaway message is we're getting better at it and also finding more correlations with time. And then the second takeaway from this slide is that this pattern of brain activity, or EEG electrical activity, is unique to the individual. And so it can be used as a biometric identifier, and relatively short sequences, again, can distinguish between people because Our patterns of brain activity are characteristic of individuals. So those are two messages. This data is increasingly informative about our state of health and also is uniquely tied to us. Now, this is all developing, of course, but getting better, I guess is the message. So let me switch to my next slide. So this brings us to this question about this brain data, if it's informative, if it can be used to identify as individuals, we start to think about privacy issues. And so another piece that is kind of interesting about this is that it may be uniquely informative about the mind. Now, there's all kinds of things from which we infer people's mental states, gait, voice, voice stress analysis, key logging, the way people type in the words they use. This is known as digital exhaust. So we're often making inference about people's mental states, but this brain data may be uniquely informative about mental states as well. And so this is giving rise to a variety of soft law responses around the world, starting to try to put policy in place around the privacy of this brain data, and in some cases, legislative amendment. Some might say that legislative amendment's not strictly needed since personal information is protected under most data protection laws, and this would be a form of personal information. But nonetheless, there are some amendments just to underscore the particular sensitivity of brain data this is what these amendments are doing. So I want to put this together with a big challenge that I think I see for open science and big data. So I'm switching gears a little bit now to the idea of open science, which is a movement to collect scientific data and make it openly available. And there's tons of good reasons for this. Accelerate science, avoid duplication, improve quality and trust. It's efficient. We're not reduplicating work all the time. There's questions of access to knowledge and participation, especially with this publicly funded information, should the public not have access to it. Also an obligation to research participants to make the best use of it. So proliferating repositories of neuroscientific data are being built, but at the same time, big data and AI present fundamental challenges to how we protect the privacy of people in these databases. And current data protection models tend to be individualistic, based on consent of the individual at a point in time. And this is really being challenged by the fact that collections of interlinked big data sets increase re-identification risk, even if you try to de-identify the information. And furthermore, as this data is put together, we're able to make sort of inferences about people who didn't even put their data into the system. So this idea of protection as just those people represented in the data set consenting is starting to fall apart, really. And brain data is rich data, and it's of unknown potential inferences. Like the amount of information that's within it is increasingly known. And so how do you consent now to participate in a data set where we don't really yet know the kinds of inferences that can be drawn from it going forward? So we have a bit of an interesting problem here with increasing collection of brain data that is informative, identifying, is being pushed by open science for good reasons. How do we protect individuals? And so I wanted to give you one little example data set from Open Neuro, which is a big online repository of brain data. And it's remarkable how much information is present. Now, the names of the individuals are not there, but we know it's 74 juvenile offenders, 66 controls from 2 particular locations with quite a lot of metadata. All of those data fields on the left are present alongside the EEG data of these individuals. And so you can see that with this, in collaboration or not collaboration, put together with other data, we start to be able to re-identify people if we wish to do so. So what to do about all this? And so these are the kinds of discussions people are having at the privacy data protection level. We could try to have more robust data use agreements. So people going to Open Neuro to pull down that data set will have to actually agree to certain protections. It shouldn't be as openly available as it is, for example. I was able to just download all of it plus the metadata. Some are saying we should have no-go zones. And this is inspired by approaches to genetic data privacy, that you cannot use this data to make insurance or employment decisions. A third possibility is privacy enhancing technologies, where we actually build into the collection of the data, certain measures protect privacy. But what's interesting here is we come into a direct conflict with the ethos of open science because some of these privacy enhancing technologies, for example, use obfuscation to try to feed noise into the data set or to remove elements from the data set to reduce identifiability or re-identification risk. But you can see that actually that conflicts with open science, which wants maximal information to be retained for future uses, many of whom we don't yet know. So what I will do is I'll stop there because I've got 3 seconds left in my 7 minutes, and I will pause there and thank you very much for your interest.
Jen, thank you so much. As I prepared our wonderful group of panelists, I let you know that after each question, after each presentation, I would try to come up with a question for you to think about as the other panelists presented, and then we would come back to the question in a panel discussion before the open Q&A. And so my question for you has specifically to do with privacy and whether old definitions of privacy are actually still relevant. Or, in fact, one of the things that we need to undertake in this new world of brain technology is a complete redefinition of privacy. And if you agree that on that hypothesis, why haven't we gone down that path yet? So I'll let you ponder on that while we go on to Laura Cabrera. Laura, thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you for the invitation. So for me, the topic of this session was really interesting, right? Brain technology ethics and talking about future implications, because that's what I see the intersection of not only of my work, but really of my passion, right? So I think similar to Professor Chandler, I am not a neuroscientist. I train as an engineer, and then I train as an applied ethicist. And my journey then took me to a third of my passions, which was the brain, right? So within neuroethics, I have really find a very appropriate house for all the different passions that, really fuel my research here. So it's really been very interesting for me to talk about this, and because it's embedded in the majority of things that I do. So science fiction is one of the things that it's a core thing. I mean, I don't know if that part of, maybe not all engineers share their passion for science fiction. It's very likely that you don't have to be an engineer to have a passion for science fiction, but it's certainly one of those genders of literature that really brings together this speculating about what can we do with technology and science. And there's so many examples of, science fiction novels, science fiction movies, portraying neurotechnologies, right? So I have 2 examples here in my slide, but there's a variety of other wonderful stories that touch on it. And I think one of the beauties of science fiction is that it really allows us to think into the future, to reflect on what type of futures we might be creating, what might be the dangers that are ahead of us as we engage and bring new technologies into societies, right? So I think it's a very good tool to help us anticipate and think about things that we should be considering. Now, if we from the future go into where we are now, right? So when I started my training or my work in neuroethics, the field was, there was the beginning of, not the beginning, but certainly like deep brain stimulation, brain-computer interfaces were not where they are now. There were certainly developments, there were approvals, but it has been until very recently that we've seen like these really big, race in this type of neurotechnology, certainly with companies like Neuralink, right, where really just the public perception has started to get more informed or more aware of the advancements of neurotechnology. So, and not only different advances of neurotechnology, like deep brain stimulation, as I mentioned, but also how are we leveraging the use of artificial intelligence, machine learning, in how do we use all of this data collected to infer, as my colleague Professor Chandler was saying earlier, right? So I think we are at an intersection point where is the tools, is the different neurotechnologies, but we also now have AI is playing an important role in how do we make sense of all of these data. Now, there's certainly a lot of benefits that I can see, right? One of the reasons that I feel so passionate about this intersection is after having, seen someone with Parkinson who showed us in one of her presentations how she was before Parkinson and seeing her there presenting, it was really outstanding what some of these technologies can do for patients. So there's certainly, benefits in how these neurotechnologies can help someone to restore mobility, to be able to connect to the world, perhaps to different interfaces, to perhaps mitigate some of their more debilitating symptoms. And yet, when we see some of these headlines, like the one I have here, if you notice the small letter, it actually says, implants and other technologies that decode neural activity and can restore public's abilities, right? So that seems very, sensible. But when we start putting into the public's mind these ideas of mind reading, it also creates fears, right? And that leads me to, with all of these promises that neurotechnologies have, all the incredible futures that we can be thinking, we're also entering into a variety of unknowns, right? There's many things that we don't know about potential side effects, risks. There's issues about, perceptions of invasiveness, from physical invasiveness to having these technologies to really contribute to the surveillance machinery that we have in some of places around the world where more and more data is collected and not necessarily for medical purposes. And as well, when we start using or thinking about these applications beyond medical applications, right? So a lot of my previous work in neuroethics was focusing in neuroenhancement. And so I think this example of using neurotechnologies beyond medical applications really brings to the point that the non-medical use of these interventions, there's not always a clear cut, sense of, okay, the risks outweigh the benefits or vice versa. But more importantly, I think it also, we're not seeing how these narratives start getting embedded into our societies and really start shaping the future of them. So I think for me, the point I want to leave for all of us is to think about the role that we have as a society to engage and really think together about the type of futures we want as we continue developing and using these type of interventions. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you so much. So I'm going to launch the same question to you as I did to Jen Chandler, which is about privacy, which is that do we need to be working on redefinitions of privacy for the 22nd century or even sooner? But another question for you, Lara, to just think about as we move on in this event is, has there been a focus should there be a focus on differences for neurotechnology, both in science fiction and in the real medical and non-medical worlds around gender? What do we know about differences for women and for men? And maybe you can share a little of those insights with us when we come back around to you in a little while. So thank you again. I'm going to give the floor all the way over to Olivia Matshabane in Cape Town. So we are taking a very fast flight over to South Africa to hear from Olivia now.
So thank you very much. As mentioned by Dr. Ellis, I'm joining from Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm based at Stellenbosch University and currently a principal investigator of the African Neuroethics Research Group and neuroethics researcher there. So as mentioned by colleagues who've spoken today as well, I'm not a neuroscientist. I've also trained in psychology before moving into my PhD in medicine and bioethics. And so I think I came to this field really having a foundation and having spent time learning about mental health as well as brain health through the psychology programs that I pursued at the 3 institutions that I was in at here in Cape Town, South Africa. So I want to first of all just start off by acknowledging everybody who's contributed to the work that we're doing at the African Neuroethics Research Group and at Stellenbosch University in general. You'll see Dr. Illis mentioned that she had visited us, but all of the trainees and all of the fellows have really contributed to really driving and having the conversations on the field on this particular topic within the continent. And so I wanted to start off with that. So why is neuroscience and why neuroethics, why are they important in Africa, where I'm currently based? And where I call home. We know that neuroscience in general requires diversity and inclusivity, and I think a lot of the work that's being done by World Women in Neuroscience, work that's being done by the International Brain Initiative, International Neuroethics Society, and so many other avenues that are fostering and aiming to ensure that we have diverse individuals and teams working on this topic and thinking critically about the kind of future that we'd like to have, as mentioned previously by Dr. Laura. So I think one of the most important things, and one of the things that we try to ensure that we do within the continent, based on everything that you've heard already about the risks and the potential benefits of neurotechnology, and understanding what that means in different cultural and contextual lenses, we really are aiming to contribute to establishing policy frameworks for neuroethics within different African nations and within the African continent in general. And that's a long journey, fully understanding that and fully acknowledging that. But I think one of the main strengths that we've been able to be a part of, myself included, and I know that Dr. Illis and several other colleagues have been involved in the UNESCO recommendation on ethics of neurotechnology, for instance, which is a global instrument that allows us to have a foundation in which we can draw on and also be able to contribute to with contextually and culturally relevant empirical work from scientists, neuroscientists, neuroethicists, but also really, really important and crucial to our work is people with lived experience of brain and mental health conditions. So just to say that before I go into our specific study, why this is important for all of us in the world to be thinking about today is we've recently seen the global prevalence and burden of mental disorders systematic analysis that was recently released. And from it, we could see that 1.2 billion people worldwide were identified to be living with a mental disorder in 2023. And that was a 95.5% increase since 1999. And that's a really high number of people around the globe who are experiencing mental disorders, mental health conditions. And so one of the things that we really are trying to do is to see whether the interventions that are being developed, that are being established, how are they contextually and culturally how are they contextually and culturally considered, and how do we ensure that we have guidelines to ensure that they are sensitive to different contexts. So the project that I'm currently leading at Stellenbosch University, working with colleagues at Aga Khan University's Brain and Mind Institutes, really is working on a modified Delphi approach, trying to engage with scientists, policymakers, people with lived experiences and community members. And to date, we've engaged with more than 120 individuals with lived experience of mental health conditions and neurological conditions on the continent, as well as more than 50 Africans who are scientists in neuroscience and ethics related fields from over 11 African countries. And I think, this is really a start for us, and this is really a foundation in which we're working as a transdisciplinary team, intentionally aiming to apply culturally sensitive methods and also building capacity of students through degrees that they're earning through the process of investigating what are the contextually and culturally relevant guidelines for the context in which we are based in. And so this is just kind of the trajectory of how we've started off by identifying that we don't have any policies that exist for neuroethics in Africa. And how do we design and conduct neuroethics research with our communities, with people in this context, so that the ultimately we're able to make sure that it's locally led and that it's informed and also can inform the global community as well. So, engaging communities and public engagements is one of the crucial steps that we've taken through different community events, but also conferences and participating in organizing and also participating in sharing our research within contexts around the world. So, I think one of the main things that we're hoping to do at the end of the day is to advocate for evidence informed neuroethics guidelines and policies in Africa. And we're doing this on the knowledge and the foundation of the work that's also been done through UNESCO and through the framework, the recommendations that have been established in UNESCO. So I think there are three things that we would like to ensure that we do, and that is to build capacity of African trainees in ethics and neuroscience, and also to ensure that we establish guidelines that are contextually and culturally relevant, and also to ensure that we continue having global conversations involving a diverse group of people as we move forward. So I think when we're speaking about creating the future, everybody needs to be at the table, and this is something that we try to take quite seriously. So thank you very much.
Olivia, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. The question I'm going to put on the table for you is about the role of women in science and specifically in neuroethics in South Africa. When we come back to you, if you could comment on that, it would be nice to hear about that. And also, I remember being so struck when I spoke at the International Neuroethics Society event that you hosted in Cape Town. One of the participants spoke about domestic violence in South Africa still, domestic violence against women. And if you could just sort of speak with us again when we come back to you about is there a role, so can neuroethics respond, can involvement of women in neuroethics in South Africa be responsive? And then just a really wild card question is, should we be focusing on neurotechnology when there are some very significant on the ground problems to resolve that we all wish, of course, to not have to be witnessing in today's world? So I'll leave you with those questions. And before we go on to Julie Robillard, I just want to say that we have currently 20 countries represented in this event from Austria, Brazil, Dominican Republic, Egypt, Spain, Turkey, Ireland, India, and many others. That's just to name a few. And thank you all for being here. This is really, when we talk about World Women Neuroscience, this is what we're talking about. It is just thrilling to have you all here with us participating. So we're going to go over to Julie Robillard now. Thank you, Julie, for being here with us from back in my time zone in Vancouver, Canada.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening. What an honor and a pleasure to be here with you today to explore this intersection of brain technology and ethics, and what an esteemed panel. I'm very grateful for the invitation. So for my brief introduction, I want to share with you three tensions that we've witnessed in our work over at Neuroethics Canada at the University of British Columbia, looking to advance social technologies to support brain health across the lifespan. In my lab, the Neuroscience Engagement and Smart Tech Lab, or the NEST Lab, we're interested in how social technologies like robots, like social media, like AI chatbots impact our brain health from childhood all the way to older adults and people living with dementia. And so I just want to illustrate three areas of tension and then talk about moving forward. So our first point of tension that I want to raise is that we have feelings towards technology. We have feelings about technology, whether we're talking about brain-computer interfaces, whether we're talking about intelligent social robots, large language models like ChatGPT. In our work co-creating social robots for children with lived experience of anxiety, we heard from the children that robots could be a safe space for sharing their feelings. And this is work that was done by tremendous trainees in the lab. But if you look at this image, I'm inviting you to look at this image on the slide, which is a social robot helping a child do homework. I can imagine that different feelings might be showing up. Some of you maybe are thinking, wow, this is an exciting idea, and how helpful and motivating that might be for the child. Some of you might look at this and feel like this is actually kind of inappropriate. You might worry about the implications of a device like this, of a relationship like this from a human standpoint or from a privacy standpoint. We heard a lot about privacy. And so these feelings that we have, whether they're positive or negative or conflicting, they have implications for, in turn, the ethics of these devices and their implementation in our day-to-day world. And so it's really important that we understand them better. The second point of tension that I want to share with you that we observe in our work is that technology really shines a light on this paradox between our actions and our values. And this is something that's been demonstrated really elegantly in the privacy space called the privacy paradox. So in the study on the slide, when we asked youth how they go about choosing a mobile app that supports their mental health, we heard them say that they care about privacy, and we heard them say that they want the app to be scientific and evidence-based. But when we look at how people behave online, the choices that they make, what they share on social media, how they interact with various forms of AI, we see this paradox. We see that the actions are not necessarily in line with the values. And although this paper is work we did in youth, we are asking these types of questions across a lifespan, and we see similar tensions in our work with older adults with technologies that are relevant to them. For example, things like digital cognitive assessments or AI assistants. We see this tension between how people wish to live their lives and how technology fits in or doesn't fit in with this goal. And then finally, a third tension that we grapple with in our work is that we have this crucial need for large-scale evidence, but everyone's experience is so different. And so it's actually quite hard to find outcomes that we can all agree on. So as one example, in a recent contribution, we put out about content moderation related to mental health on social media. We argued that we don't actually really know the impact of these policies, and we even found some evidence that if we ban or if we censure some words or some types of content online, youth actually retreat to darker corners of the internet to have these very same conversations. And so the reality is that we actually need real outcomes data about what happens when these policies are implemented. But these data need to consider that everyone's experience is going to differ. We know from some of our research on social media that these platforms can actually do a lot of good for youth that may lack other forms of resources because they're in a rural or a remote setting, or because they live with a very rare health condition and they don't have a lot of opportunities to exchange with peers in their community. So in looking at existing policies in social robots for aging care, so a similar question, older adults told us they felt it was really important to have an ethical code in this space, but they're worried that this code or this ethics code might be influenced by the views of a few. And this is a quote on the slide from one of our interviews said, an ethical code should be created to guide the implementation of robotic systems, but whose ethics get to inform that code? And so I think that really illustrates that tension where we need large-scale efforts in policy and governance, but that really needs to be informed by quite a diversity of views. And we heard this just from our previous panelist as well. And so this, for me, is a real tension, but it's also an area that's ripe for opportunity, tackling this complex challenge of measuring large-scale outcomes of individual experiences. What an interesting challenge for us. And so to wrap up, even though I am actually a neuroscientist by training, which is exciting, I want to put forward that if we want to explore and resolve these tensions and start moving forward instead of conflicting, neuroethics, which we've heard about today, which is the study of ethical and social implications of neuroscience and of technology developments, is actually a really strong choice to frame our questions and to frame our approach. As a field, it really invites us to focus on needs and values. We heard already about the importance of lived experience. That's a very core focus for our own work. By design, sitting at the intersection of brain, ethics, and society, it really is inviting us to ask questions about what we most need to move forward in this moment. From its very inception, neuroethics has been transdisciplinary, built by some of the founders here on this call, by neuroscientists, by philosophers, by law scholars. And I think as a field really understands that many disciplines must come together to tackle the biggest challenges that we have in neuroscience. As a field, it allows us to harness the strengths of mixed methods. You heard about many different methods already today. So really embracing of large-scale data sets, modeling, and other quantitative approaches, but also really welcomes rich, in-depth qualitative work to get at these individual experiences. And finally, by the very questions that it's posing, neuroethics is really committed to real-world outcomes. And I think that's what all of us here on this call and all of our attendees, I'm sure that's what we're hoping for, right, is positive change ahead. And so with that, thank you for your attention. I'm very much looking forward to this discussion.
Julie, thank you very much for that beautiful presentation. And a question I'm going to launch for you. I'm going to come back to the privacy question. But so that we don't get bogged down on that, I do want to ask you if you have observed in your research differences between women and men, girls and boys in your results around social media. If you could comment on that when we come back to you. And also, I'm really curious whether through your work, if you're able to comment on whether the soft law instruments that we have been seeing come up over the past 3 and 4 years, OECD, Amnesty International, UNESCO, are they addressing the concerns that your research is is highlighting and bringing to the fore? And is soft law the answer, or should we be more on the side of those who think about criminal law and legislation as we see in some of the countries that Jen put up on her very first slide? So those are the questions I'm leaving you with. Now, in the next 15 minutes, we're going to loop back to the panelists with the questions that I laid out for them and see what they have to say. Before we do that, though, I really want to be sure to acknowledge Marianne Bakani, who is the Events and Operations Director at Neuroethics Canada, who, without her brilliance, we would not be able to hold events like this, bringing women from around the world together. And also Michaela de Kock from World Women in Neuroscience, who has been Marianne's co-partner in helping us to organize this event. And we're both, all of us, deeply grateful to you for all that you do and enable for us, for women around the world. So with that said, Jen, I asked you about privacy. I was wondering if you want to pick that up. Do we need new
Sure.
definitions of privacy, and why are we not thinking
Yeah.
about that as a focus?
So I'm going to speak from within a legal perspective since I'm a law person. And I guess what I would say is privacy, it's actually not just one thing. So it is notoriously difficult to define what privacy in fact is. And it tends to overlap with all kinds of other values that we have. So if we talk about privacy, are we talking about privacy of information? That's data protection or data privacy or information privacy. Are we talking about the privacy of your decision making, the ability you get to make decisions? That's also understood as privacy. Or territorial privacy. People get to go into your space and look around. And so privacy is many different things. So I think if we narrow our focus to this question of information privacy, data about you, I think there it's not so much having to redefine what we care about. We sort of have a sense what matters. I think what we're lacking is the tools to actually protect it. And there we have lots of difficulty with this proliferation of data, linkages of data sets, and it's sort of our model of this control and consent, this individualistic mode, which isn't working too well. And just think every time you go onto a website and you're asked, click here to approve these cookies, it's just not workable for the individual to try to make these decisions about informational privacy all the time. And so this is leading to, for example, suggestions from some that we should just give up. I mean, keep that in place, but give up on its being terribly effective and instead use controls of the use of the data as opposed to trying to prevent its collection. Just have these no-go zones. You don't get to make certain types of decisions about people based on certain kinds of data. Now, then you get into a whole extra difficulty of, well, how are you going to enforce that when algorithmic decision making is being done based on machine learning models, and we don't even know what data is actually included in it. So can we definitely say we're not using someone's data for a reason we're not supposed to? So anyway, this is a really active debate right now in data protection law and policy, driven, to be honest, more by AI and foundation models of different types than it is by neural data. But I think that as we go forward with the collection of neural data, it's going to be really important to keep an eye on whether these regimes that are being built to deal with AI and machine learning and like protection from algorithmic decision making about us actually take into consideration also the inclusion of brain data in those big models and systems. So yeah, not so much of a redefinition of privacy, but a really careful, hard look at how are we actually going to protect what actually matters to us at an underlying level, with regulatory approaches that might work.
All right, thank you. I asked the question about privacy to almost, I think, all the panelists, so I'm going to invite other panelists to jump in on that question. I'm also seeing questions starting to come in, so let's try to keep our answers nice and succinct so we have plenty of time for our participants to also weigh in on all that we've covered today. So other panelists on the question of privacy.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Jennifer said, because this is also an area that I'm deeply into right now. And one of the things that, some of the literature is really trying to point out is coming away from privacy protections that is focused on the category of the data, right? So we have a lot of legislation focused on neuro data. But perhaps we should be more agnostic about the category and really focus on the harms that certain data brings, right? So it allows us to think more about, let's focus on the harms that come, the risks that come, rather than whether this is because it's neuro data or genetic data or, so I think, to me, I'm not being a lawyer, it makes sense just because I've seen this tremendous amount of policy and legislation with each different type of technology that comes, each different type of data that's been collected. And I don't think that is useful on the one hand for researchers as they're working with those type of data, but also in the larger scheme of things, right? I think there are data that are not as discussed in scholarly, discussions that are perhaps more problematic in how they're used than some of the ones that get to be discussed the most.
Thank you, Laura. Any other panelists want to weigh in on question of privacy? Olivia.
Me. So I think I just want to add on to what Dr. Cabrera just said in relation to privacy, thinking about not only individual privacy, but also community privacy, and thinking about what are the impacts potentially of specific information about a community for that particular community. And I think it's one of the attendees have also raised the question about stigma, and that's one of the potential harms that has been identified. So if we are able to identify, or if we are reporting on certain behaviors or certain conditions in a particular community, what risks are we then potentially increasing for those individuals in relation to that? So I'm just bringing to the table this thinking about a communal privacy and also communal kind of consent around data and sharing of data.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Olivia. I'm going to go out of order and come back to you in just a moment in advance of the other panelists. But Julie, do you have any comments on privacy that you want to insert? Right.
I just want to insert that I think all of these comments on privacy really highlight the importance of knowledge exchange and knowledge translation for all the excellent work that is being done in this space, because it's hard to protect our privacy, our personal privacy, our information privacy, in absence of that knowledge, right, of where are the threats and where are the opportunities and where are the mechanisms to enhance or improve privacy on a personal standpoint. And I don't want to put the onus entirely on the individual, of course, but I think this is a really nice example where us having these conversations out in the world is a really beneficial activity.
All right, thank you, Julie. Olivia, before we go back to you, I just want to say that I realize I was remiss in not acknowledging another force of nature on the World Women in Neuroscience team, and that's Sonakshi Gupta at WWN. Sonakshi, please forgive me for not mentioning you earlier, but please accept our thanks as well for helping us to bring this event together and all your involvement with World Women in Neuroscience. So, picking up on the idea of threat or the word of threat, Olivia, I want to come back to you and ask you about gender, domestic violence in South Africa, and where women in neuroethics and neurotechnology can come together to play a role in hopefully reshaping a historical wrong.
Thank you, Judy. I think when we're thinking about the South African context where I am, we always have to think about the history of this particular context, the history of colonialism, the history of apartheid. And, you know, this is a history that and a legacy that kind of continues to have implications come up in different ways within our society. Thinking that apartheid only ended in 1994. So I think when we're thinking about violence and exposure to trauma in this context, there is a lot of that prevalent within our society. So I didn't mention this, but I'm actually in the Department of Psychiatry. We have a unit that actually focuses on post-traumatic stress disorder, and this is really where we're nested, and we're working consistently with people who have a lived experience of a trauma-related condition. And you know, we're engaging every day, hearing about what are their lived realities, what are the interventions that could potentially work in their context, and what are some of the barriers. And one of the things that you've just mentioned around gender experiences. And so, you know, there's a lot of work that's been done on trauma and gender-based violence that's highly prevalent within this context as well. Our head of department, Professor Soraya Sirat, leads the unit that I've just mentioned, and she's done a lot of work in that area. And so I think when we're thinking about interventions and when we're thinking about introducing interventions in the society, we always have to think about those things and also think about the cultural implications in this context. So are women allowed to use specific technologies? When can they use these particular technologies? Are men allowed to use specific technologies? In the work that we've been doing with sort of deliberative focus group discussions, we have had, for example, males express to us that concerns around using neurotechnology and how that could be perceived as though they could be less of a man because they're using this device that's helping them, you know, attend to particular symptoms, and they aren't able to necessarily regulate that themselves. So I think these are all things that we do need to take into account. And you know, for us, trauma and thinking about trauma-informed ways of working is extremely important. So thank you for that question, and thank you for that observation from the International Neuroethics Conference where you kindly presented for us, Judy. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Olivia. So I think I'm going to go together now, and everyone can weigh in, including our participants, on questions that we've been asking. But let me just go to Julie and Laura and ask about differences in gender between women and men and girls and boys in science fiction, in neurotechnology studies, and social robotics. What can you share with us about that, either in terms of methodological approaches, trying to look at gender, or some results and observations that you've had? And Laura or Julie, just jump in. The question is for both of you.
Let's see if Julie wanted to go first in this one. So let me start with the science fiction part, which is that at least the way I see science fiction, not just in connection to neuroscience, right, is that it enables us to see beyond what we currently have. And so even before we have these discussions about, this moving away from just female and male, it allows us to think about why just this binary, right? There's a spectrum of genders because gender is socially constructed. So I think it enables us to imagine things. And really, then with that in mind, I think the science and technology kind of start chiming in with their own pieces of, what does it really mean to be, assigned a certain sex? Because it's also, I think, in biology, there's not necessarily binaries, right? So it just, again, when we move from imagining to what is possible, it at least enables us to have a more open mind as we are seeing the world. So that comes from science fiction. Now, in terms of how gender plays in some of the studies that I've conducted, my samples have tended to be, at least in my kind of interviews, focus groups, the samples are rather too small, but a methodological point of view is, and it'd be interesting to hear from Julie, is a lot of participants, depending on the study, tend to be more women. Again, depending on the study, depending on, like for my Parkinson patients, certainly I get more men than women, but for psychiatric indications, I tend to get more women involved in the studies. So I think there's a bias in terms of who we get in our studies just because of people approaching this type of research. But in the larger sample ones, I haven't found that that gender has been a predominant factor in shaping any of the results that I've had with large samples. So at least that's from a more research perspective.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and Laura for setting the stage so nicely. I think my answer is actually kind of similar in the sample sizes and the questions that we've asked. Those effects have not emerged in a big way. But two things I want to point to. The first one is that women disproportionately end up with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. So it's 2/3, right, of cases of Alzheimer's disease are women. And so that has implications for the interventions that we're developing in this space, for the policies that we're thinking about in this space. And I think that really highlights the importance of having women at the table. I can say with some amount of pride that we are speaking to a lot of women in our work, looking at social robots for older adults. And so that's been kind of really wonderful to have those voices at the table. For some of our social media work, I think sort of we can imagine that girls and boys and men and women use social media differently. But I want to highlight a study where we didn't see a difference, and that's a study of youth who've had organ transplant, a solid organ transplant, or a liver transplant or a heart transplant. And we were interested in how they were using social media. And this is one of the studies where we did look for effects and we didn't find any. So youth went online to share about experiences related to the medical journey, to the symptoms that they were experiencing, to their mental health related to that condition, but we really didn't have standout effects. So I think it really, to me, depends on the research question, but it also really highlights the importance of considering the population that you're working with.
Thank you both. I'm not going to, we're exactly on time. I'm going to go out of order with the questions, and I do think we'll be able to get to all of them. But since we've been talking about transgender effects, men and women and those from different diverse gender identifying groups, I'm going to pose a call for you by Dr. Hall, who's a distinguished professor at UBC and our former chair of Neuroethics Canada's advisory board. She asks about transgenerational effects. So across the lifespan, what are your hopes and concerns in terms of we've heard from Julie about children as well as people from the older population. What about as we're like spanning the generations? What ought we be thinking about? It's an open question to our panelists. Julie, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I love this question. So I think technology, if we're looking at technology, I think technology has the potential to bring us together across generations, and also it has the potential to isolate us across generations. So if we imagine who uses what social media platforms, for example, there's already a divide, right? Certain generations are still using Facebook, certain generations on Instagram, others are looking at newer platforms, and so in that way, technology can end up isolating different groups. But I want to point out that it can also do the opposite. And in our social robot work specifically, we're looking at design solutions that work for many different people in the room or work for many different family members or different generations in the room. And so to me, what the call is a very careful attention to design and to making technologies with ethics in mind, with users in mind. And the best way that we can do that is by really having a diverse group of users at the table, at the research table.
All right. Thanks, Julie. Olivia, from a very different culture than our Canadian and North American one represented by the other panelists and myself as the moderator, do you have a comment on transgenerational effects?
Thank you. I thank you, Dr. Ellis. I was thinking about this question as I saw it, and I was really intrigued to kind of think deeper about how, what are some of the implications transgenerationally when it comes to technology. What I can say from the work that I've been involved in and that other colleagues are really leading within the African context, when we're thinking about transgenerational, really again, thinking in the context of trauma, and there's colleagues that have done work around looking at the kind of impact of trauma across different generations. And what I'm thinking and what we're thinking about also is, if we're introducing technology to kind of heal for healing and for treating purposes, what implications, positive and potentially unknown, could that have for the next generation? I think I'm somewhat hopeful in terms of the impacts that it could have, but also cautious around how, as Julie has mentioned, how is it designed, how are the ethics embedded within the design, and how, very importantly, are the cultural values and ways of kind of understanding life included. I think there could be there's an educational element that can come into play, especially when we're thinking about digital technologies and how they can actually convey information in very creative ways. We've seen, for example, with AI, how information can be easily translated to different languages and become a little bit more accessible. So I want to say that I'm hopeful, but I do think we need to be very cautious and take it very seriously when we're thinking about long-term impact. So thank you very much for asking.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go on to the very first question we received from an anonymous attendee. And I really like it because I'm looking at our panel. We have someone principally from law, principally from neuroscience, principally from engineering, and principally from psychology. And wearing those hats for us, in addition to the many, many other hats that you wear, the question is, how do we strategize, or how can we strategize to make sure that women are always at the table while the world is transformed by technologies, whether we agree with the direction that technologies are taking us or not? And Jen, can we offer you the first crack at that answer? You wearing your lawyer's hat.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure my lawyer's hat is on. I think, yeah, it's a big question, and it's sort of which table are we talking about? I think that it's critical, and in fact, there are quite a few women represented at many tables, but I think it's something we have to be super vigilant about, making sure women are always there because the experiences are often distinct. And so, and I think it's at all the levels. So it's a political imperative. We see low levels of, in many places, including my country, not that as many female politicians being elected. So that I think that's critical. I think we should make sure that we have women acting as thought leaders, having opinion editorials, being available to be interviewed by media, and just sort of mentioning what's distinct about female experience when we have those platforms. And then thinking also from the perspective of a lawyer, where we right now have ongoing litigation by the school boards against social media companies. If there are issues specific to girls whose education are being affected by social media prevalence in the schools, these should be being raised as part of the arguments and even in courts. So I would say a combination of attention and also making sure that when we do have the platform that we do mention these issues that are specific.
All right, thank you, Jen. I'm just going to go across my screen. Julie, you're next.
I think I want to echo a lot of what Jen was saying. If I'm thinking about neuroscience specifically, I'm thinking about STEM education for younger girls and for young women. I think having role models in this space is so important. I love that we had a female astronaut on the recent NASA mission. So things like that can have such a big impact. So that would be my point of focus to help this.
Thank you. Lara?
I mean, I think my previous colleagues touched on really key points. If I had to add, I think, oftentimes, at least from my culture, I'm from Mexico, right? Sometimes we tend to not want to jump to opportunities because, oh, I'm not ready. Oh, I'm not going to be good at it, right? Like, I think there's so many good examples in this panel of, how women have succeeded. And so that's why I think the intersection of having good models, being attentive is key, but also really giving us as women our, that we can do whatever we want if we put our minds to it, right? So really get ourselves with that mindset, I think is also important, because I see many of my students, many people are still struggling to say, we can, right? And I think we need to be more role models. We need to do more mentoring to STEM people trying to get into these places, and we need to be champions for each other.
Lovely. Olivia?
I think my colleagues have said everything. The point that I wanted to emphasize was really the mentoring. I think mentoring goes a very long way. And I just want to say, even though Dr. Ellis has asked us to kind of wear our primary disciplinary hats, I think what was most inspiring for me with the field of neuroethics was realizing how there were so many women and so many female leaders in the field of neuroethics. I believe when I read an article in 2021, it said more than 60%. And that is not as it is in other fields. I fully understand that. And I think as we're kind of working in these transdisciplinary spaces and we're encouraging an increase in females and women within these spaces, we do need to be very intentional about mentoring. And I think I was asked a question earlier on about women and in neuroethics in South Africa, and I think that's one of the key things that we've been doing really well, is that creating spaces for other generations that are coming up after us and intentionally spending time mentoring them, sharing opportunities, supporting them with letters of support, and all of these things that go a long way when you're trying to kind of make it into a particular space in which you're not familiar and in which you might not have all of the expertise and all of the time really to get to know, because of other responsibilities like unpaid labor that we know a lot of women are kind of the ones who bear the brunt of the most in our society. So I think those are the points that I'd like to add. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. And I just want to say that as a self-organizing organization, that's a bit redundant, I apologize for that. World Women in Neuroscience is the sine qua non example of superb mentorship, having started just from a number of committees belonging to other bigger organizations, never letting the mission and the objectives and the distinctive concerns of women get sort of jumbled or integrated with other questions around professional development and the importance and distinctive nature of mentoring women by women as well as by others. Is really, really so much what World Women in Neuroscience is about. So mentoring is it's a giant spotlight for me. We have someone want to jump in? By all means.
I was just going to say thank you for being my mentor.
Oh gosh, what a pleasure, Olivia. It is a joy. Okay, we have and we have a long way to go together. It's a mutual mentoring, and that's also an important principle, I think, for all of us, is that it is not a one-way street. I'm talking about transgenerational impacts. It goes from older to younger and younger to older. I'm going to go to a set of questions, so I'm not going to read all of them. Please forgive me if I'm paraphrasing your thoughtful question, but they all seem to me to come together around protections, neuro rights, laws around neuro data. And so I'd like each of you to comment, if you would please, around a question that I actually launched earlier. I can't even recall to which one of you it was, but maybe to Julie. Is soft law doing its job? Do we really need to be thinking about revisions to, declarations of human rights that have been around for a long time? Should we be looking at federal or provincial or federal or state or federal, whatever the sort of national and smaller community level oversight? Is professional self-regulation sufficient when it comes to the acquisition and protection of data that can be acquired from the brain? So, Laura Cabrera, I'm going to ask you to go first on that one.
Yeah, I think I have a strong opinion about all of these things, but so I'll try to um, uh, say what I think in a way that hopefully makes sense to the audience. So I think obviously legislations of law is really important, and I think we should always think about the macro, so international, national, but also go into the local, right? Because implementation in that kind of state of things can break very easily, right? You can have a great idea, but in the local way, if you haven't studied things at that level, it might not work. It might have different tensions to work with. So all of those are important. In terms of which order, I think that's a harder question, and that's not my field. I don't know, haven't done a lot of work in terms of implementation, but I think we need to be very thoughtful about all of these different stages. In terms of really more the focus of the discussion about neuro or neuro legislation, I certainly think, at least in my point of view, we missing the boat of focusing on the things that matter, right? Because the focus on neurotechnologies, the neuro data that is collected, and I think of, again, the country that I'm from, how many people in their lifetime will have access to a neurotechnology? Not many. Right? And so I'm trying to think about all of these bills in Latin America. What are they really for? What is their purpose? So I think I have a lot of concern about how these often are seen more as, I don't know, performative, or maybe they're seen more as trying to emphasize certain values that I think important. But again, they are losing the focus of really protecting people in their daily lives, people that might never been in touch with neurotechnology. So I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Lara. Others, please jump in.
Go ahead,
Julie.
Jen.
Oh, sorry. I'll be really quick. So I think we need a lot of tools in the legal/regulatory toolkit. I think there's a role for all of these things. One thing about the discussion that has been going on for the last few years is it's at a very high level, of sort of broad general values that we espouse, that we see that are potentially at risk with neurotechnology. But really, what ends up mattering, where the rubber hits the road, as they say, is down in the application of these rules. What does it exactly mean that, mental integrity is at risk or mental privacy is at risk? We need to be looking at the application of a certain technology in a certain population for a certain purpose and figuring out, okay, how are we going to balance the potentially conflicting interests and risk benefit that's at stake. So I think there's a lot of work in getting more granular and thinking in real cases.
Jen, this is perfect because I was going to go to the step that comes after application, which is evaluation. So for a technology that, unlike the technologies that Laura is alluding to, social media is used by a huge number of people worldwide, and there are innovative policies and regulations in this space. In Australia, no more social media for youth. It is so important that we now have this applied regulation that we follow up. Are youth happier? Is their mental health better? Are they safer? Did this change their behavior online? So we really, really need to look at those regulations, those policies, those laws, and then have that next step, which is what happened once we implemented or once we applied them.
Thanks, Julie. Olivia?
I think I'll just add on something really small to what's already been said. I think in the African context, we have the African Brain Data Network, which thinks a lot about brain data and neural data specifically. And I think one of the things that we're really concerned about at this time, as I'm also a part of the group, is to think about ownership and the data that comes in, who owns it. And I think having really clear guidelines and clear protections in place for people, for individuals, for communities is really, really important. But I think, as Laura said, it really has to be aligning with what's happening within the local community. Otherwise, it just becomes another document that people don't really engage with and that they don't really apply. I think including when you're thinking about adolescents, for instance, we've seen with this recent report that there's a high rate of depression and anxiety increased amongst adolescents. How are we involving them in the discussions around the use of technologies like mental health applications and other technologies? The work that UNICEF is doing, which I've also been really privileged to be involved in. How are youth engaging with technology and thinking about ethics in relation to technology and how we should be ensuring that the protections are there, as well as Judy mentioned, following up, how are they experiencing if there's some rules that have been set, how are they feeling now? Do they think that things could be changed? What modifications need to happen, etc. So I think those are just some of the points that I'd like to add on to the rich discussion that's already had. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go to a question that for me has a simple answer, but I'm going to invite all of you to weigh in if you don't like my answer or just want to add onto it. It's a question from Dana Lafayette Hunter. Thank you for coming forward and asking your question about what is a good way to get involved in neuroethics as a graduate student, or I guess a graduate student in cognitive science, as you write here, in an applied way. My answer is join the International Neuroethics Society. Is my number one answer. Anybody want to add to that from your own laboratories, your own perspectives?
Because depending on where you're based, sometimes, you might be lucky to have at your university someone that does that type of work. So, and if not, we have the INS has a network of mentors that you can reach out. Don't hesitate in doing that, right? I think that's part of what the INS has really, it's a key resource in connecting people that don't know about neuroethics and want to step in, right? Want to learn more about it. So I think I would echo what Professor Illes mentioned, and again, just reach out to people that you've read and that you think, I really like this work, and have a quick Zoom call, and you never know what might happen next.
Julie?
I wanted to add, well, join World Women in Neuroscience, of course, as well, which seems to have an absolute wealth of neuroethics related activities and mentors. But I wanted to to push one step further and say, join the International Neuroethics Society, but also engage. There's an absolutely wonderful essay contest for trainees, contest, sorry. The annual meeting has a lot of virtual parts to it that you can attend from the comfort of your lab or your home. So really get in there, comment, questions, all of that is really helpful to make connections. And as Laura mentioned, you never know what might come of it.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I have one last point. I think these are all excellent resources, and I think they all are actually shared and amplified through the International Neuroethics Society. So you'll find out about a lot of them in any case if you join as a member. I think the Dana Foundation Career Network in Neuroscience platform is one that's really great for graduate students. There's a lot of virtual talks that occur, and oftentimes you can reach out to the speakers. You can always reach out to the speakers, but I think it's really important to take that initiative, because you can actually connect, and especially soon after they've done their talk, they're very eager to engage. So I think making sure that you're part of different societies, if there are local like universities, like Dr. Laura mentioned, then engage in those. In Cape Town in South Africa, we do have some opportunities where we have virtual talks through sometimes the Stellenbosch University Neuroethics Working Group, where we've got a very amazing neuroethicist who'll be speaking with us in 2 months' time, Dr. Catherine Basel. So, we'll share those opportunities as well. And I think just engage and join the discussion. Thank you.
Jen, do you want to add anything?
I was just going to mention 2 quick things. First, I think a cognitive science background is a fabulous foundation for thinking about some of the really cutting edge issues in neuroethics. All these issues around what exactly we can infer from brain data to make the connection to mental states is we need cognitive scientists thinking about all this kind of stuff as they are. So it's a great foundation. Also, I'd invite you to send me just a quick email. I was looking just now to find it, but there are some listservs with these really useful neuro law kind of letters that I'll give you the information how to get on it if you'd like. I get a lot of useful information, neuroethics, neuro law, from some of these newsletters that are going around. And I'm happy to send you the information on that.
Right. Thanks, Jen. And I'm just going to jump in before we get to a close here, that Martha Farah from the University of Pennsylvania is one of the mothers of neuroethics, and was and has been a force of nature in the Cognitive Neuroscience Society, and I can only imagine that the CNS today has a neuroethics working group or affinity group, and take a peek at that organization and see what kind of neuroethics activity is going on there. So you got a lot of information there. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to do a quick last round with all the speakers and ask you, from your point of view, for women in neuroethics and neurotechnology, what should the priority be? And I'm going to put Olivia on the spot first.
I think thank you for putting me on the spot. That's what I think. I think, the priority for women in neuroethics, and I think what the priority should be, is to really create opportunities to fund women, really, because we can talk about all these meetings and groups, but if we don't have the funding and the financial support, we really are excluding a lot of women from being a part of the conversation. And so I do want to flag that, and I am very cognizant that World Women in Neuroscience also thinks very carefully about how do we get funding opportunities, and how do we ensure that we're actively engaging in that landscape as well. So I think that's the priority for me that I put on the table: funding. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Olivia. I'm just going in reverse order on my screen from right to left. Laura Cabrera.
I echo funding, but I think also from some of my current work, to really focus on research questions that are relevant to women, right? So for example, Parkinson is one of those disorders where women are underdiagnosed, right? So we need to do better And I think so putting our focus on what have been the areas where women have been underserved, and really try to improve those.
All right, thank you, Laura. Julie?
All good, and important considerations. I would add collaboration. I think we have such a wonderful example here, just with the different expertise at this table. I can tell from the questions we've received that there's rich expertise in this network. So really opportunities for us to meet and to learn about each other's wonderful work and to come together from different disciplines to make change happen.
Nice. Thank you very much. And Jen, from your perspective?
I agree with everything that these wonderful people have said. I guess I would say that we should watch for sort of the indirect ways that the research is really important to women or might affect their interests in particular. And so just as an example, an area that I'm very interested in is communication neurotechnology, which would be of critical value to people who have lost the ability to communicate or find it very difficult to communicate. We know that women are more often, but not exclusively, sexually victimized if they're unable to report. And so looking at technologies that help with reporting might therefore be of particular value to women, but of value to everybody. So there are things where the interests might be a little bit different for indirect reasons.
All right. Thank you, Jen. So with those observations and priority setting, I'm going to bring this event to a close. This was an amazing group of panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. World Women in Neuroscience, I can't be more proud to be a part of you and work with you to bring these kinds of events and thinking and open discussions forward. Neuroethics Canada, thank you, and International Brain Research Organization and International Brain Initiative. Thank you for all for coming together with us on this Monday, June 1st, 2026. We have one more session coming up. It'll take place in September, and we hope that you will all join us at that time. And with that, we conclude.